content over everything.
People being here, and I'll be talking more about the anti-colonial protests, or better said, the Black Lives Matter protests, which have become partly questioning the colonial history of Britain and the world. And there were a number of things interesting to note this week. I think it was actually last Sunday when we were here that they took down the statue in Bristol. And when I went home, I noticed some friends of mine had got a bit weary. Oh no, what will happen as a consequence of this? Maybe it will strengthen the right wing or something like that. And it is certainly true that the right wing turned out, as we saw yesterday. I saw a kind of mad video. Did you see the video of Tommy Robinson? There was a kind of mad appeal for people to attend this demonstration. And he looked like he was suffering some sort of mental breakdown. But maybe it's the cocaine or something, I don't know. He doesn't seem to cope very well. But anyway, he looked like he was having a mental breakdown. He was screaming and shouting and swearing that, "Our fucking Churchill, and our fucking this, and our fucking that is being attacked, and the police are going to get their heads kicked in," and all the rest of it. It's quite a wild rant and rave. And then another noticeable thing was the whole world began to discuss statues. And a friend of mine, he posted something. It was a picture of people attacking the Berlin Wall. And I said, well, that one maybe wasn't such a good idea to get rid of. But, and then someone wanted to know about why I thought such a strange idea. And in relation to the statues in general, I would say the following. I think it was great they tore down the statue of Colston is his name. And years ago, I started a tour in London, doing the history of London. I used to go around and cover all the sites of the slave trade. You know, there's where John Hawkins, commissioned by Elizabeth I, don't forget. It was Elizabeth I, great historical figure in Britain, who was a financier of the slave trade originally. The original missions from Hawkins and Drake were organised by Queen Elizabeth I. Or at least with the support of Queen Elizabeth I. Then I used to take people to the Bank of England. The Bank of England, the four founding financiers of the Bank of England were slave traders. You know, they were making their money from the slave trade to turn human flesh into gold. And with that gold to dominate the world economy. As British imperialism spread its talons around the world. And I read this morning the piece by Boris Johnson, where he says, oh, well, the problem wasn't British colonisation. The problem, he said, was that the British didn't remain long and the British aren't there now. That's what he said. He said the British would be there. This was in 2002, I believe it was. He said the British should be there now because we know better. We taught them well. And when we withdrew, everything fell apart. You know, it was the standard imperialist psychology, which had a certain influence in the 1970s and 80s, that the Indian people didn't know how to look after their own country. So in the period of decolonisation, or better said, of the withdrawal of direct colonisation and its replacement with indirect colonisation by economic means and by means of finance and terms of trade. I sometimes talk about a friend of mine from Speaker's Corner. He used to go by the name of Shah. And he used to come to Speaker's Corner as a city trader in the 1980s. And he used to be very Thatcherite, smart suits. He's from, I believe, from Uganda. And he used to say, well, capitalism is the nature of man. And many years later, about 10 years ago, he came to me at Speaker's Corner and says, I'm not one of them anymore. I said, what do you mean you're not one of them? He said, I'm not a capitalist anymore. I said, what do you mean? He says, I don't do that, exploit these people anymore. I said, why not? He said, I used to be a coffee trader. The price of coffee is set in London. Not set in Uganda or Vietnam, in London. And because the price of coffee is set in London, the lives of the people who produce the coffee is controlled by the City of London and in the City of London. And as one of the traders engaging in speculation to accumulate on this basis, he eventually went and visited coffee traders in Uganda. And there he discovered the miserable conditions and lives of the masses in Uganda, and he felt he could no longer participate in the ruthless exploitation of the people of that country by means of financial manipulation, by means of the weight of economic power resting in the centres of imperialism, as it was and as it continues through financial mechanisms. There was an article in the Financial Times this morning or yesterday, and there someone said, well, if you tear down everything connected to imperialism and the slave trade, you won't have any buildings left in London. But that's precisely the point. It is that the entire edifice of the society which we live under has been founded on robbery and plunder of the rest of the world. How did they do it? Very simple mechanism. The first capitalist countries, Britain, Belgium, Holland, later France, Germany, the United States of America, Japan, they had mechanisms by which they would manufacture products in modern factories so that in 1 hour you could produce some beads, glass beads, and then they would travel the world on their ships trying to discover where new wealth could be acquired. And then Christopher Columbus and Khoo would come to the beach in South America, and they would put some beads on the floor, and the natives would come out and see these beads. They'd never seen a thing like it, manufactured in half an hour in Britain. And so they would go and collect gold objects that they had spent thousands of years extracting from the earth and shaping, and exchange them for these beads, because they had gold and we had these unique things called beads. In this way, capitalism was founded by a system of unequal exchange. Unequal exchange in the amount of time taken to produce the products that we exchange with the people in those countries. And then, of course, just the same as we have now, there was disease. We brought disease to South America and North America, and in that way led, apart from the massacres introduced by the Europeans, by the Spanish, by the Portuguese, by the British in North America and South America and Central America, there was also the spread of disease. Diseases which these people had never had, just like in the Amazonian area now. There is a higher death rate in the Amazonian area in Brazil, where the Native Americans are still living and have not encountered the same number and diversity of diseases as the bodies have in Europe and the Westerners in North America. And the consequence of that was massacres, physical massacres through annihilation, and massacres by the spreading of disease. And then, of course, in North America there was alcoholism as well. They spread alcoholism amongst the North American indigenous people. Now, some people will turn around and say, well, what's that got to do with today? Nowadays, we don't believe those things anymore. We don't practice those things anymore. And you're just stoking up hatred. That's what the right wing, and also in reality, many of the liberals are arguing. And there's a confusion can take place now. And that is, when the statue of the slave trader in Bristol was torn down last week, I couldn't help but feel joy when I saw that scene. Because it was the people themselves taking action against an object representing their general oppression, not only today, but throughout the origin and genesis of that oppression. But you see, then you get the madness that the liberal elite in the United States of America, particularly the Democratic elite, and the liberal elite in Britain, suddenly jump on the bandwagon. They're all down on their hands and knees, you know, showing the knee, declaring their support. All these liberals who in fact support capitalism. The root of modern racism is not an ideological or a personal animosity to people of different races. The root of it is a system of producing wealth, organised around the world, centred on the advanced capitalist countries, and within the advanced capitalist countries, centred in the hands of a few thousand or a few million across the world, capitalist employers who extract resources from the people of the entire world, no matter what race you are. And you see the ally, and you can give a very clear illustration of this. When I was a young man in the 1980s, I would go on demonstrations and organise solidarity work with our comrades in South Africa. And I went on a speaking tour with a guy who had been in a prison cell with Nelson Mandela. Around the country we went, black and white audiences, huge support. But you see, when South Africa eventually experienced a revolutionary upheaval in the mid-1980s, in the run-up to 1989, the liberal elite around the world, they decided the South African regime could no longer be tolerated. And so they made a plan not to rid South Africa of grotesque inequality and racism, but instead of this, to implant and secure a transition of power whereby a handful of people, in reality, of black people, would be elevated into the elite. The whites would maintain their dominance over society, and you would have a smattering of black faces who would then declare that racism is over, equality exists. But if you look at South Africa today, you'll know the condition of the majority of the black masses in South Africa is barely any better, and in many circumstances worse than under apartheid, which indicates, as we said back in the 1980s, apartheid was a system of capitalist exploitation developed by the Boers after 1948, specifically to entrench the class differentiation based on race. So they merge the two things together, make people think that the racial division is not actually the same or ultimately the same as the class division. Why are more black people dying in Britain during the COVID crisis? Why? Because they have shittier jobs. That's why. They're the ones who've been expected to drive the tubes, drive the buses. They're the ones who are expected to go and clean the city of London for the elites. They're the ones who are expected to go and work in the warehouses, delivery centres. They're the ones who are more likely to be employed in low-wage employment. That's a fact. That's how capitalism organises its racial subdivisions. Not even consciously sometimes, as far as they're concerned. As far as they'd like to get rid of these things, to purify it, to make it appear equal for all races, whilst at the same time maintaining a world where 8 people, all of the whites, all of the men, own more wealth than half of the world's population. Where according to the IMF last week, I believe it was, 60 million people have been driven down to the point of starvation in the last 3 months. 60 million people. And they aren't in Germany or in the United States, although in the United States millions have been driven into poverty, but not to the point of starvation. And the world is organised by capitalism with multiple levels of exploitation. Starts, of course, with labour, because everything in society, everything we wear, all the resources we have, the communication mechanisms, the housing, the banking, the infrastructure, the corporations, the businesses, the shops, all these are methods by which capitalism enables the wealthiest in society who wish to engage in productive accumulation to accumulate from the sweat and blood and energy of the rest of the population, from the working class of the world, regardless of race, regardless of sex, regardless of where they live. Capitalism is a system to extract from the workers by paying them a wage equal to what it takes to bring them back to work and get them to raise their families, whereas extracting from that work a surplus, the labour power of the working class, which is not paid for, the surplus extracted from the working class. And that surplus is divided into three things by the capitalists themselves. It's divided into profits. They all say profits is what we need. We need the economy to be profitable. We need to get everybody back to work so that the economy is brought back to life. Rent. During the crisis, we've been told we must still continue to pay our rent. Except the big businesses, they're refusing to pay their rent. But all the rest of us, we must carry on scrupulously maintaining our economic prudence and carefully making sure we pay our landlords our rent. And then interest. They're lending out money, but they want the money back with interest. Surplus over and above from lending a piece of paper or a line of numbers on a computer. And all those three sources, rent for the capitalists, rent for the landlords, interest for the bankers, profit for the capitalists. These are the three, it's like the trinity, the holy trinity of capitalism. The extracted labour from the working class, the unpaid labour of the working class, of the entire world. And yes, they will divide people up. One layer, they have the senior managers, the CEOs, the top layer, the multi-billionaires. They have their own clubs and associations and interconnections. Then you have the millionaires and their hangers-on, the people who act as, if you like, agents, mouthpieces to defend them. You can get up, you can do well, you can advance, you can go forward. The typical bullshit of the American dream. And it's no accident that the racial explosion began first in the United States of America. Because in America, they preach this bullshit to black children. You have pop stars and celebrities who come on television. They promote them, or even a president. They promote them. And they say, now you've got equality. Look, you've got Whoopi Goldberg. Look, you've got Spike Lee. Look, you've got Barack Obama, top man in America. Racism must be abolished. Look, anyone can get to the top in America. That's the delusion.
Why did Barack Obama get there?
Well, because he's a supporter of capitalism. It makes no difference whether he's black or white, if he's a supporter of capitalism. Because he's aligned with an entire elite developed over hundreds of years.
The Pope, the Archbishop of the Vatican, why did he write to Trump?
I don't know what you're referring to, tell me.
The Archbishop, Vilago, he wrote to Trump. He said that there's a war going on from the right and he split from Pope Francis. So why don't you tell us something about that?
Because I don't know anything about it. If I knew something about it, I'd tell you something about it. I know nothing.
Latinos who support Trump. Why
Sorry,
is that?
what's
Black
that?
and Latino people, I've got them on Instagram. I can show you right now. They're promoting Trump. Why? Why are they not promoting Biden?
Some people, you see,
Some people.
saw through
Yeah.
the lies about equality under Obama. Some people see through the lies about equality. I can't remember who's that famous chat show person, a woman who always does Oprah Winfrey, another one. Oprah Winfrey is a billionaire. But every single program I've seen of hers, I haven't watched that many, but over the years you can't avoid them. She always turns around and says, when someone's, I don't know, whatever, in a low position in life, she always turns around and says, you should just get on in life. Educate yourself. Train yourself. And in America, lots of people, they all cheer and clap. Yes, get on with your life. Raise your life up. Drop the bad things. Adopt the good things.
2020, who's the victim?
Now, the gentleman here says, that's true, he says.
Yeah,
He
it's true.
believes the
Who
argument.
is the victim?
He believes the argument.
Yeah, I believe it.
But the fact of the matter is, it is factually incorrect what you say.
Why?
It's factually incorrect
Why?
what she says. It is not that one person, you or him, could not advance themselves in society and become a millionaire? Yes, they can.
Yep.
You can win the bloody lottery, for God's sake.
No, it's working
You can
hard.
get nearly £1 billion on some of the lotteries.
You can't be a victim. You got to work hard.
Or, as you say, the theory that they actually promote is that you work hard. And if you work hard,
They want you to
you
be
can
a victim,
advance
that's it.
yourself. And if you work really hard, hang on. Tell us. I'm happy to debate you.
Huh?
I'm happy to debate you.
fine.
Right. So, the
I
focus
can
on.
bring you black people from America,
I'm
Latinos,
not-
who will tell you that Trump is not there to deserve the
Yeah, but
agenda.
we've got that.
Biden
I've
can
got
do
that.
it
I've got
worse.
that. I've got that. Well, there are some people, because there are many people in America who are in the lower classes. Lower class, I mean, the condition in life means their income is insufficient to maintain a reasonable standard of living. By that, you're talking about 50% of America. One guy in America, the Walmart family. The Walmart family, they have more wealth than 25% of the population of America. So, no wonder, these ideas float around and circulate that this is an elite game, which is true. And of course, Donald Trump, he played on this during the election because the Democratic Party, don't forget the Democratic Party, they were the ones who supported slavery in America. And the Republican
Hillary
Party
Clinton's on
was
trial.
opposed to slavery,
Hillary Clinton is on trial.
at least when the Civil War began.
Hillary
And they
Clinton-
required the black
Hillary
soldiers
Clinton,
to win the
who's head
war.
of the KKK, mates with David Duke. Why is she on trial? Why are they not bringing that up?
Well, you
Hillary
see,
Clinton.
if
She's
you
on trial right
if
now.
you
She
get
could be-
if
she
you
could be
get
sentenced
too
to death.
obsessed,
She could be sentenced to death.
if you get
Hillary
too
Clinton.
obsessed
With what?
about what white person is there, what black
I'm
person
talking
is
about
there,
Hillary
in
Clinton.
the upper echelons, you will misunderstand what is
She's being
going
tried
on.
right now. That's on the media. They're not bringing it
Racial exploitation
up. Why don't they bring up Hillary
and
Clinton?
racism
She could-
is
she
a
could be-
function of the
Why?
system of capitalism.
Oh.
It is not distinct from it.
Hillary Clinton is mates with the KKK. Yeah.
Is what?
She's mates with the head of the KKK, Hillary Clinton, David Duke. Why is that?
I mean, I would, if that were true, and I don't know if it is,
You can do
but
it
for the
only-
moment, I'll accept your premise. I haven't checked it, but let's accept your premise for a minute. It
Head
is
of the
perfect.
KKK.
It is perfectly true
Why- She's on
that
trial.
the elites
The
in
most
America.
powerful woman in the world is on trial.
Hang
She
on,
could be
hang
sentenced
on,
to
hang
death.
on,
Why
hang
isn't it on the media?
The elites in the United States
elites
of
are
America,
playing
but
a
not
game
only
with
in
you.
America,
There's
also in
something bigger
Britain,
than this.
are inextricably interconnected. I mean, you talk about KKK killer. KKK is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
They lynch and murder people here and
Black
there.
people.
But the Great Britain and the United States of America were torturing 30,000 people in Abu Ghraib
Yep.
only a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Yeah, and how many people did we kill in Iraq? Nearly 1 million, according to the
Churchill-
Lancet.
Churchill.
According to the Lancet,
Churchill
nearly 1
statue-
million people died as a
Churchill
consequence
statue,
of the war
right.
in Iraq.
Churchill
So then they
statue-
turn round and say, oh yes, we're cleaning our hands of
Churchill
racism.
statue, yeah?
Now how can you be cleaning your hands of racism if the state in power and its apparatus, its weapons, its machinery of destruction is turned against the country on the basis of grabbing their resources because they're considered to be, the truth of the matter is, they are considered by the elite in Britain to be inferior people. That's a fact. How else can you explain the way they behave towards them? They have a sense of superiority anchored in their class structure, which is reproduced by the elite schools and institutions, whether it be Oxford, Cambridge, Harrow, Eton, Sandhurst. All these institutions ingrain a sense of superiority, not only over other races, but also over other classes. And for that reason, the British elite, and that's why Boris Johnson can't seem to stop himself coming out with terms and phrases of obvious racial prejudice. And not only that, he said, I mean, I repeat this thing I said a little while ago. I read it this morning in an academic article, as well as the newspaper articles, where Boris Johnson was saying that the colonial rule by Britain over India and Africa was a good thing, and if only we hadn't withdrawn, they would be doing all right today. Britain should be more involved in the fate of those
What
countries,
did
they
Enoch
said.
Powell say?
Sorry?
What did Enoch Powell say?
Enoch Powell said there will be rivers of blood
And what did he
if
say
you
about
allow.
what did he say about the racial people in England? They should go back, right? Did he say that?
There were many people who were arguing for
Argue,
people
do
to
your
go
own
back.
research.
Sorry?
I said, I'm telling the people to do your own research because you're not telling what Enoch Powell said.
Well, you're mentioning.
no,
I mean,
no,
look,
you're mentioning-
when I make a speech,
Yeah.
I normally try and refer to things I know about.
So
Now,
do your
if you
research.
want to question me on
No.
something that I don't know about, or you're loading a question for
speaking
me,
about what it is.
don't condemn me for not answering your
Enoch
question
Powell.
perfectly.
Enoch Powell
I
told
can't
me to go
know
back
what's
home.
in your head before
Enoch
you
Powell.
say it.
Enoch Powell. He's talking about now Churchill and Indians and Africans.
Because we're referring to that in general.
so
But
I'm
yes,
referring to Enoch Powell, who
what
also
about
said
it? Yep.
the immigrants should go back.
Yeah.
Why did he say that? And he got removed.
Well, he said he.
And you're too young to remember.
Yeah, I'm too young, but
I was there. I saw
was
it.
there?
Yeah, I was there.
What did he say?
Well, he basically said it, but he was wrong. And quite rightly, he was removed immediately by everybody.
Okay,
Now,
what were you
in periods of severe economic contraction, as we have now, last month, the biggest economic contraction in British history. That's what we've had. 20% collapse of the economy. There are nearly 9 million now furloughed, millions unemployed. Now, in those circumstances, as the economy begins to expand again, of course, there will be an exacerbation of conflicts between different social and ethnic and racial groups, organised from above, not even intentionally, but automatically. For example, they will turn around and say, well, there's so much housing available, social housing available. Who will get it? Of course, if this Muslim man gets it, as opposed to this white man here, and you're on a council estate, and there's not extra housing being built, some people, the Romy Tobinsons of the world, will start squealing and shouting, look, Muslim man gets white man's flat. And of course, some people who also want to get a flat and don't get one will prick up their ears and say, yes, cultural takeover, the destruction of England. I saw Katie Hopkins talking the other day, and she said,
So why is the EDO there?
sorry?
The EDO are fighting because that's what they see, that their country's being destroyed.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. So EDO, if the police are promoting it, not police, if the politicians are promoting it, and the EDO are getting angry.
I'm saying it's a function of the system of capitalism. We now have millions unemployed, right? They don't realise they're unemployed, but they are.
Yeah, because of Corona.
And as not just because of Corona. Corona is a concealment for the collapse of capitalism. Not every country in the world has collapsed, but some countries have. Those countries that have collapsed were already on the verge of collapse. All that was revealed, just like the people who died from coronavirus over the last month, or last 2 months, most of them had 1 or 2 comorbidities. So those economies and societies that are collapsing also had 1 or 2 comorbidities in them. The comorbidity in Britain is massive debts in the corporate sector. The government since 2009 has been throwing money towards the big businesses, lending money willy-nilly. And what have they done with it? They haven't invested in new housing, in healthcare, in education. How else can you explain the fact that 40,000 people have officially died for one simple reason? For want of a mask. For want of a bloody mask. That's what it is. That's why people died. Because they didn't provide healthcare workers. They didn't provide patients. They didn't provide staff with simple bloody masks. These things.
Excuse me, that's not necessarily true what you're saying
It
about
is. Well, go on.
Are you suggesting that 40,000 people have died of COVID-19?
More than 40,000.
What evidence have you got?
Well, the
Because-
ONS
Now,
statistics.
Hold on a second. The ONS, just government department,
Well,
a lot of people
statistical
would
department.
suggest that a lot of those deaths have just been reclassified as COVID-19, whereas really they've died of 1 or 2.
Okay, there have been studies on this. Some of the studies, for example, in Hamburg, they made a study of autopsies of the bodies of people who. I'm trying to answer you.
You're going along with the official narrative.
I'm trying to answer you. I'm not. What is the official narrative that I'm going along with? I gave a figure.
Those people have
I
died
gave a
of
figure.
COVID-19.
In fact, it's more than that. But in any case,
There's other countries like the Philippines that have got double the population of Britain, and and they've only got, like, say, 10,000 deaths.
Yes.
So how do you explain that?
There are differences. There are differences.
Going along with the official version.
Well, I'll answer your point whether you want to stay or not. I'll answer your point whether you want me to stay or not. Well, I'll answer your point whether you want me to or not. You could be polite enough to listen to my answer.
Trump wants to rebuild his economy.
Okay, now 1 second. In Hamburg, there was a study.
Trump wants to rebuild his economy.
Let me try and answer him.
No, you're not answering. He's
Let me try and answer him. Because he made a point. Let me just try and answer it. I said 40,000. He's questioning the death figures because there are people who say, rather than people dying of COVID-19, they are dying with COVID-19. And that is being attributed as the cause of death when it's actually just an additional factor in the death of those people. Now, it's perfectly true that a proportion of the people who have died in the last period have died with rather than from. In Hamburg, they made autopsies of the bodies of around 100 people who are said to have died from COVID-19. They found 25% of them had died with and not from. Okay? So you could discount 25%. I think that's reasonable. On the other side, what is misunderstood by many people who take that narrative is that it's not only the people who've died from COVID-19, which in that case would be an official figure of 30,000 rather than 40, but also those who have died in the community who have not been registered on the databases, and also others who've died from other ailments as a consequence of not going for treatment because the hospitals had to be cleared out because they were central vectors of infection. And that's the reason why the crisis became as severe as it was, because we have no vaccine for it, we have no cure for it, and it's highly contagious. And that's why the shops are opening tomorrow, because capitalism, this is the problem with British capitalism, I'm trying to answer you, because capitalism basically says this. You've got the curve of deaths going up like this, and then you've got the economy going down like this. So either you have higher deaths and lower economy, or you have a lower economy, or better said, a growing economy and higher numbers of a growing economy means higher numbers of death. A declining economy, in the present circumstances or lockdown circumstances, means, declining economy means less deaths because people are staying at home. So capitalism inevitably is weighing these two options up. Do we want more deaths? Can we tolerate more deaths in order to get the profits going again of the private capitalists? 2/3 of all the subsidies from the government in the last 2 months, 3 months, have gone to big business. Big business. Not the workers, not the poor,
George Soros.
but to big business.
George Soros.
Not only George Soros, my friend. George Soros is one capitalist amongst many.
Does he control the media?
I'm not sure he does.
He doesn't control the media, no.
How do you
There are many
control the
different
media?
people who control the media.
So
Many
back to
different
my
people.
point.
Now,
Trump wants to impose taxes from the Chinese, but Joe Biden doesn't want that. So
Well,
he wants to rebuild his economy.
we gotta-
Why don't they want that?
we got a kind of a funny story connected to what you're saying. I'll come back to what you're saying. But connected to what you're saying, we kind of got a weird story, haven't we? On the one side, we had Brexit to stop the foreigners coming in, right? Big hoo-ha about all the East Europeans in England and Britain taking our jobs, taking our homes. And yet, only a week ago, the British government suddenly declared, we want Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese, 3 million are welcome. 3 million. Hong Kong Chinese welcome in Britain. Now, I'm half Chinese myself. I don't have a problem with Hong Kong Chinese people coming here. Well, why are they coming? They're coming because for a year they have been smashing up railway stations, throwing Molotov cocktails at people who don't want the roads blocked, smashing up airports, causing havoc and chaos in the name of getting Britain and America to help them. There are actually people on the streets in Hong Kong with British flags and American flags, demanding that Donald Trump and Boris Johnson send the fleet to invade Hong Kong. At the same time, these lunatics are smashing up Hong Kong for a year and being cheered by the British establishment. When one statue falls in Bristol, they start screaming and shouting, "Anarchy on the streets of Britain. Anarchy on the streets of Britain." One statue of a slave trader. So, do you see that? Do you see that guy? Do you see that guy yesterday on the demonstration? Do you see that guy yesterday on the demonstration? He walked up to the police and he adopted the Tyson Fury stance. What a twat. What a bloody twat. And my friend here showed me a pic. What's the guy's name? Graydon Anderson. He's a regular. Huh? Braden Anderson. He's a regular at Speaker's Corner, agitating for Tommy Robinson and co. I saw this picture from RT yesterday.
Tommy Robinson cancelled.
One guy walked up to him, gave him a little slap, the guy went flying on the floor.
Why did Tommy Robinson cancel?
Unfortunately,
Tommy Robinson
I believe the Black Lives Matter made a mistake in calling off their demonstration and turning it onto a day before and demonstrating here instead. I believe we should have wiped them off the bloody streets, those Nazi toe rags, because they'll be back. Emboldened, luckily for us, they were so idiotic that they launched attacks on the police and undermined a certain amount of their position. However, I tell you this, they will be back. And they'll be back in force because we are entering a period like the 1930s of dramatic social conflict. And that is why the middle ground, the so-called middle ground, has disappeared. That's why Starmer, even though his poll ratings have gone up, will achieve nothing compared with what Corbyn could have achieved. That's because society is polarised. And it's polarised such at the moment the government itself is split. No matter what way you look, the splits will break out at the top because they don't know what to do, how to get out of the socio-economic crisis created by capitalism and exacerbated by the virus. I repeat, created by capitalism and exacerbated by the virus. Now, we are also witnessing, as part of this poisonous atmosphere being created, that the ruling classes in America and in Britain have started waving the national flag against the Chinese. So the Chinese took on the chin to protect the lives of billions of people around the world. They took a hit. They had to lock down. They knew nothing about the virus when it broke out. And yet they saved the world for a time. What did the British do? What did the Americans do? Absolutely nothing. Boris Johnson, in contradiction to this, he said, on the 3rd of February, he declared that free markets are necessary around the world. Free trade is necessary around the world. And if you lock down or you take measures against the spread of the virus, then you are fools. And instead of this, Britain, he said, should jump into a telephone box and come out as Clark Kent like a supercharged Superman and save the world. That was the argument Boris Johnson gave. I don't know why the guy, he's got some problem. There's no problem discussing things. I've discussed, well, I don't want to only talk to you, but I will talk to you. But the problem is, whenever you don't get the attention, you start just turning around with everybody else. Okay, good for you. Anyway, so Boris Johnson declared that he was Superman who was going to fight, change the world by not locking down and not doing anything. And that's how we landed up where we are. After all, 5th richest country in the world, and yet, was it now 3rd highest death toll in the world. And the other countries, Brazil and the United States, have far larger populations than Britain. So as a percentage of the population, Britain has had the worst experience with COVID-19 of any country in the world, any major country in the world. Okay, what is it? I think Liechtenstein, with a tiny population, higher percentage of the per million, but otherwise, you know, or Andorra, I think it is. But otherwise, Britain has suffered worst of all. Worst medically, worst economically. And of course, that will stoke up tensions in society. Because when the economy begins to grow again, or better said, when the economy begins to open tomorrow, there will naturally be all the ingrained prejudices of the employers in their relation to the employees. There will be all the ingrained prejudices in the institutions in relation to the general population. And so you will get prejudice. Did you see the statistics yesterday? I saw the most racially despised group in Europe. It's not black people, Indian people, it's the Roma, the Gypsies. The Romanians, actually, is what it is. Why? Because we see them on the street, selling the big issue, sleeping on the street. We see them, they're visible, they're unusual for our culture, and therefore a lot of people, they think they're dirty, filthy, horrible, thieves, robbers, plunderers. And of course, this type of mindset, the insipid declaration of war against other nationalities, other religions, other groups, this is inherent to the situation. It's endemic to the situation we live in. That's why the attacks on China were the precursor of the emergence of conflict over race and nationality. Remember at the beginning they were saying, Chinese eat bats. That's what they said, remember? How many people saw the picture of a Chinese woman eating a bat? Sent around on WhatsApp. Millions and billions of people around the world. And I see people, left-wing people, ostensibly, posting things about, don't tell me I can't blame the Chinese. Don't tell me the Chinese aren't responsible. Where does this come from? It was a narrative promoted from the top by the United States of America, because they were already in conflict with China. They already had a direct conflict with China. Why do they despise China? Because it's lack of democracy? Because it's a government that does things for the people? Because it's a government that represses people in Hong Kong or Xinjiang? No. Or Tibet? No. They don't care about any of those things any more than they cared about the Libyans when they bombed them, or the Iraqis when they bombed them, or the Afghanis when they bombed them. By the way, they've invaded Afghanistan 4 times in 150 years, 200 years. 4 times they invaded Afghanistan. And then they wonder, you know, and in fact, many of the terror attacks in Britain by Islamic fundamentalists have happened because of imperialism, not even because of religion. A lot of the people who were the actual people who carried out the bombings in Britain, if you look at their background, they were drug dealers, they were errant youths, if you like, who then went to prison, were recruited in prison often, joined up with Islamic fundamentalists, and without practicing Islam themselves, often they were drinkers, drug takers and so on, womanizers, like many of the people who committed the September 11th attacks. Many of them were renowned for being people who were breaking the rules. And yet, they still felt that they should attack. And the reason for that is because of the integration of imperialism with capitalism and with the system of society we live under. And so, for example, the 7/7 bombers in Britain, when they were put on trial, they were adamant that it was the action of Britain in Iraq and Afghanistan that drove them to set off the bombs. Not Islam, not Allah, not an Iman, but British foreign policy. And so when you understand the history of British imperialism, and yes, people should study it, but not like they seem to make it, they seem to think. It's some sort of, again, it's the liberals, the liberal capitalists. They seem to think everything can be resolved by educating people. In other words, you get a teacher to teach you about slavery, or you get a teacher to teach you about the Holocaust, or you get a teacher in class to teach you about racial inequality. Although that can be very laudable, people learn more in an ounce of experience than they do with 1,000 tons of theory. They don't learn about colonialism and statues by having a statue with a small plaque on it that reads, "This was also a slave trader." They learn about it by tearing it down and by appropriating history themselves. People said, oh, they won't learn about history. That is history being made. That's the point. Now, that doesn't mean, I'm saying, like some people have argued this week, oh, that means you take down faulty towers where they attacked the Germans. And I remember watching that as a kid, my mother being German. I remember watching that as a kid and thinking, bloody hell, that's why everyone attacks us at school. But it's not from television. Or Gone with the Wind is gone. You think that does anything to improve race relations? It does nothing. Absolutely nothing. But if people act, if people combine, and above all, if they not only extend their reach, you see this with Martin Luther King. You saw it with Malcolm X. Engaged in struggle over a long period of time, they discover the easiest path to defeat your enemy is to draw away his supporters from him. That means winning the white working class to your side. An alliance based on class, not only on race. Organize if you need to defend yourselves. Organize to protect your community. Organize to combine your community. And then show the others how they should be organized. How the working class of Britain, black, white, Asian and other, should be combined together against the real enemy. International finance capital that came sweating with blood and flesh from its very bones, from its existence. When it came into existence, capitalism was minted human flesh. And as it develops today, it still is like that. According to the IMF, 60 million people driven into starvation, or to the edge of starvation in the last 3 months. 60 million. That's the reality. So, understanding imperialism and its connection to what is imperialism? Imperialism is the dominance of finance over industrial production. It is the dominance of the first capitalist countries over the rest of the world. And they control the motion and movement of people. They talk about immigration. When my father as a Chinaman came to Britain in the 1950s, he came from Malaysia. At that time, 600 million people had British passports. 600 million, far more than today, far more than the migration today was possible. 600 million people. You see, in order to change society, you have to understand the structure of that society. And that means you have to challenge the elites which control that society. And who are the elites? As I point out, very simple terminology. The bankers, the capitalists, and the landlords. Every single one of us will be tied to their wealth and power. Every single institution in society is tied to their wealth and power. And that power is the power that we have to break. And that means organizing, combining, recognizing your commonality, supporting others in their struggles, and binding those struggles together into a struggle against the system of oppression rooted in those three, the holy trinity of capitalism: landlords, capitalists, and bankers.
That's the root of the problem. Now, how do you resolve it? We have a world economy and a British economy that has collapsed. So how do we resolve the problem? Rather than making people unemployed, reduce the working week to 24 hours a week. 6-hour working day, a 4-day working week, with no loss of pay. How do you resolve the homeless problem? You expropriate the empty buildings. There are millions of metres of empty property in Britain, in London. There's enough to house not only the whole of the British population, but millions of extra people coming in. So expropriate the empty buildings. They won't be used anyway. They'll only rot as they are, because the upper classes, they won't be going back to those businesses. They're sitting at home doing their computer work. They're going to stay at home doing their computer work. They're going to move to the countryside. So why not house that building over there alone? 4 stories of that building have been empty for 20 years. The building on the corner over there, been empty as long as I've been speaking here. 32 years. That building there. And it's it's got to be worth at least, in official prices, £50 million. And of course, that's why they say, can't have a homeless person in there, but we can lock it all up, seal it up and let the building rot. But you can't have a homeless person in there. Mayfair, in fact, has the highest proportion of empty properties in the whole of Britain. So I encourage people, don't tear down the stairs. Seize the buildings. Seize the buildings. Open the locks. Open the doors. Enter the buildings. Occupy them. Make them into places where people can be entertained, where people can live, where people can enjoy this, where people can work. Make the city serve the people, rather than serving billionaires and millionaires and their hangers-on. Now, 24-hour working week, guaranteed healthcare for free, for all, everywhere in the world. Of course we can do it. Of course we can do it. It would cost far less than the money they spent on dropping bombs on Iraq and controlling it, or so-called controlling Iraq, to provide every man, woman and child with basic health care in the entire world. House the world's population. Educate the world's population. Link together the computer networks. Provide resources for the people in every corner of the world. And in that way create a world worthy to be lived in. If nothing else has been recognised. To be fair to that guy, he caught COVID-19 here at Speaker's Corner, and he was in a wheelchair, only beginning of March. And then a few weeks ago when we started speaking here again, he came up here in his wheelchair, and he told me the story. He got COVID-19, a couple of weeks near death. And then this week I saw him walking into the park like that. I said, have you met Jesus? Raised you up from the dead. Because now he's walking around instead of in a wheelchair, you know. The energy from recovery, you see. If people recover their strength, their awareness, their consciousness, they can bring about change to themselves, their community and the world. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Content over everything. Content over everything. From your belly.
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen. COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky YG. I just listen to COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky YG. Man, just listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE. If you see me, it's COE. Content over everything. COE.
Man, not in no BBC. Man, not in no ITV. Not even listen to the MUM. They just listen to COE. Sorry, mommy, I'm lying. But listen to your mum.
Devil, Shaitan,
COE.
the name,
Man, I like COE. COE, that's COE.
gracious and the most merciful.
COE, that's COE.
Peace and praise.
COE, that's COE.